Alright, doing cams, lifters, timing chain. We're updating the cam chain plate to the 07 and up. So we're going to reuse the original push rods and push rod tubes and pull the rocker boxes off. It's a little longer, but we're going to check the breathers and check the top end now too. And it's got 50,000 miles on it. So doing this on my buddy Dave's bike, who's recording this. So we're going to start now. We're taking the tank off, and then we're going to pull off the exhaust, the floorboard, and make some room here so we can start working on it, and then we'll keep updating the video. Alright, we got the tank off, exhaust off, floorboard off. Now we're going to be taking the rocker boxes off, cam cover off, rocker arms will come out, push rods will come out, then we'll take the tubes off, we'll reuse those again. Alright, so now I'm going to remove the coil, get the coil out of the way. Unplug it. I marked front and rear cylinders so you don't mix those up, or else it won't run. So now I'm going to break the bolts loose for the breather and the rocker arm assembly. I got it at top dead center. I put like a thin rod in the cylinder. I put it in 5th gear. Spun the back wheel forward, and then you watch your intake rocker arm until it opens the valve and closes it, and then when the piston's coming back up again, you're going on to compression stroke. Once you're at the very top point of the piston coming up, and this is finished closing the valve again, now you're top dead center. You shouldn't have any pressure on your rockers at all. You shouldn't have pressure on the rockers or the push rods. So I'm going to pop these covers off. I sprayed a little bit of silicone in here just to loosen them up. So these are loose now. All loosened up. And get something to kind of loosen this up. These just slide down. Just go nice and gentle. You don't want to damage them if you're reusing them. And it really doesn't take much pressure at all. They just slide down pretty easy. Now you can see I can spin these on the front cylinder. I could spin those push rods by hand easily. So I know I'm at top dead center on the front cylinder. So after I get the front cylinder rocker arm assembly taken apart and taken off, then I'm going to work my way getting the rear cylinder to top dead center so there's no pressure on these push rods. And then I can take the rear rocker arm assembly off. We got both rocker arm assemblies are off the heads. The rear cylinder, I'll tell you, it was freaking tight. To slip this rocker arm assembly out of here, you got to really kind of wiggle it around a little bit, because those rear bolts will hit the frame underneath that hold the rocker arm assembly down and the inner vent bolt. So I was able to wiggle around the vent housing assembly and pull that out with the bolt, then work on the rocker arm assembly. I had to kind of twist it a little bit forward and kind of work it a little at a time. And that rear, I don't know if you can look in here, but that rear hole that holds your rocker arm assembly down, you'll see how snug that bolt is. Put a little scratch there, popping it out of there, which is not really going to affect anything. It's more cosmetic than anything. But I put a little tiny scratch there just because it was so snug pulling this out of there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, when I go to put this back in, I'm going to shave down like not even a 1/16 of an inch. It's just a tiny amount, you know, just so when I go to put this back together again, it's going to slip in there a little easier. Next, I'm going to be pulling off the timing cover, and before I take the cam chest out, I'm going to be removing the lifters because you don't want your lifters to fall down in when, even though I'm replacing the lifters, I don't want them to fall and hit anything or whatever. So I'll pull the tappet blocks off, move them out of the way, get my lifters out of there, and then I'll remove my cam chest. Okay, we got time to cover off, and it already has an upgraded oil pump cam chest in it. It's for the 01 to 06, so it had the hydraulic tensioners, which I took one hydraulic tensioner off already. It still has the 01 06 bearing set up, so their bearings are pressed onto the cams. It's not the 07 and newer where the cams just ride inside the cam chest. I'm going to pull it apart and we're going to see what kind of cams it has in it. Alright, the cam chest is out with the cams and everything. It's all taken apart. Pretty straightforward, simple. 6 bolts around the outside. There's 4 bolts that hold the oil pump. That comes out with the cam chest. There are bearings in here. They look like Koyos. They're not the original INA bearings. So these are the newer style bearings. I am going to change them because I got the puller already. And I got the new bearings with the kit. I got it all apart. Might as well change them. This Screaming Eagle kit is if you want to use your stock cams in the 01 to 06 and upgrade to the new hydraulic tensioners and the Screaming Eagle oil pump. Alright, gotta pull the bearing out now. So I got this puller from Heartland products. Looks like a pretty good tool. Got a nice window here, you can watch what you're doing. You got a T-bar here that goes in, and that's going to expand your collar and lock in. So it's going to expand your ears here. So once you get it into the bearing, you're going to slide this in all the way, and then it's going to, you know, it's going to lock in, so you can lock into that bearing and pull it out. So let's see. You don't want to have this threaded too far when you set this up, because you don't want to hit the bearing. So now what I want to do is I want to leave these just a little, just a crack loose, just so you get a little bit of play there, just so I can make sure I'm centered into that bearing. Okay. Get that centered. I'm going to back it up a little bit, make sure these are tight. I know I'm centered now into that bearing. Just go right in. And that's all the way. That's all the way through the bearing. So I'm going to keep it in there a little bit. I'm going to slide my lock in. Go in, you hear a tap. And then it's pulling that bearing right out. You're working on this thing, you can throw this over your crankshaft. Just protect that a little bit. There you go, there's your bearing. We're going to just unthread the shaft. I think some of these other pullers have nuts on them and you could spin the nuts off a little faster maybe. But I just think this is a really good design, the way it works. And there's the old bearing. Actually, it's not too bad. But being that we're changing the cams and we're bringing new cam chest in and everything, we're gonna change them out while we're in here anyway. So, over the old, and what to do. Repeat the same thing here again. Make sure this hole's over your dowel. Thread it in. Make sure you thread it in all the way. Good. I'm going to keep these just cracked a little bit, just so I can make sure when I'm going into the bearing, I know I'm going into that nice and straight. So, snug them down a little. I back that up just a little bit, and once I know I'm centered, I crack it just a little bit, tighten these back up more. I know I'm straight. And then we'll thread this one in. Not sure if I could get a little better light in here. Show what's going on. Just get it thread right in. And you'll feel it going pretty easy. You know, maybe you have a little initial force, very little bit, and then it gets easy again. So you want to leave it in there so it's free. You take your T-bar, you're gonna slide it in. Just tap it in easy. You don't got to go crazy hitting it in. And then once you're locked, you're gonna back it up. And get a little pressure at first, not bad, and then just spin it out. And we're free. That one's done. Plate on the ground. There's your second bearing. Done. Alright, we're going to throw the new bearings in now, so we're going to take our threaded rod, thread it into the plate, and they give you this little adapter. What's nice about this is like an all-in-one tool. They give you an adapter here that just slides right in the end, and then that's your pressing tool as well. When you put your bearings in, you always want to make sure your numbers are out. And this is actually a little bit flatter face on this side. That's a little bit more rounded. So you always put your bearing numbers facing out towards you. It's going to slide on there. And what we're gonna do is make sure we're threaded in far enough so we're not contacting the case when we put our plate. Tighten our plate on. Bearing numbers facing out. Be careful you don't drop the bearing. Now on the end of this, on the end of the installer where it's pushing against the bearing, there is a little ridge there, so it does countersink that bearing a little bit, and it's supposed to do that. So what I want to do is I want to leave these cracked just a little bit, just so when I'm going in to start pressing, I want to make sure it's centered. And what's nice about that window is you can really see it. So snug them a little bit more. Now that I'm started, I'll come back a little bit because now these are snug. Okay. Just bring it back just a little. Make sure they're tight and centered. Now we're gonna press it in. So then just basically just take your wrench and just press it in until it goes in pretty nice. feel it stop. Make sure it's in all the way. It's pressed in. Looks good. And you can see it's countersunk just a little bit. That's it. Then we'll go and we'll do the second one. Press the next one in. Alright, we're going to install our second bearing. Make sure you got the numbers facing out. Centered. Put this one in. That's it. Pull her off, install her off. Actually does both, it pulls and installs. Pull our pushing out. Take a look at that. And they're both in. You know, I disassembled the oil pump just to make sure it was clean because they recommend that on Feuling's instructions. This is a touring bike, so the touring bikes, you could put this little plug in to the cam chest because for the touring bikes you don't need the oil flow to go to the counterbalance assembly. I'll show you what that looks like. This port right here, that's hard to say. That port right there is basically a dead hole. So on the soft tails, the oil pressure goes through there, goes through the counterbalance setup. So on a touring bike, you don't need that. So you still got to use the O-ring. You know, you still put the O-ring in, but you could plug the cam chest too, just to give you a little bit more security. You're not going to lose any oil pressure. You're going to leave these bolts finger tight, so when you put your cam chest on, you can get your pinion shaft centered on that pump, so you're not, you know, you're not off. What I did is I took my cam chest to get my pumps aligned. I just put some lube on this shaft, and then you just kind of go back and forth just a little bit, very light pressure, very light. And I don't have the O-ring on the back. There's no need for it now because I'm not assembling it yet. Get it so it goes right into those dowels, and now you know at least you're lined up. So when you go to assemble this thing, you're not screwing around trying to get those pump gears lined up, trying to get it together. So now I know I'm pretty much right on. I'll pull straight off, and then I'll get the rest of the cam chest assembled and do another video. Alright, now Gonna take the cams now. I got them together in the chain. We got our two timing marks. All right, make sure they're both straight across next to each other. Set your timing marks up for your cams. Just be real careful on your lobes that you don't hit them with each other. We're gonna put a lot of lube on these too. I got some lube on these. Filled the cam chest up with a lot of lube here, so we're gonna put the cams in the cam chest now. Then we'll work on putting our tensioners in. Okay. Make sure our marks are straight across still. Right here. Pretty good. So keep your timing marks equal. Then we're going to take our shim that they require you to put in. 100 thousandths. Down here. Snap ring pliers. And I just open them up just enough to get them on the shaft so you don't go too much. There you go. It's locked in. That's it. Put a tensioner on the rear. Throw a tensioner on, and then start getting this back in to the bike. Don't forget this O-ring. You just put it to the side. Just don't forget to put it on before you put this in, or else you have a lot of problems. You won't get any oil pressure. So just double check that, and there's two more O-rings that will go into your case, which are back here. So I got the timing chest installed, and what I did is, like I said in my previous video, is I put the oil pump on the cam chest, and I left these just hand tight. I didn't have the cams on it yet. I installed the cam chest to align the pinion shaft to the flats on the gears and the oil pump. This way, when you put it together, it makes it a lot easier. Everything slides straight in. You don't have to worry about aligning the flats and trying to go on and off, and having a risk of these O-rings falling out on you. So pre-align those. After you get the cams installed and the tensioner and the chain, it's all done, and you go to install this, these are going to be hand tight still. You're going to install it. Make sure you have assembly lube on those O-rings to hold them in place. There's two behind the cam chest here and one on the oil pump going into the case. And then install it, slide it straight in. You're going to hear it go right against the case. You're going to hear it kind of make a little clink against the case, so you know you're metal to metal. If you have any gap between the cam chest and the crankcase, pull it back out and check. Make sure your O-rings didn't fall out of place. So once this is actually all the way in, then you're going to put these screws, and you have 6 cam chest screws. You're going to put them in hand tight. You're going to spin the engine in 5th gear a few times, and what that's doing is that's aligning the cam chest and the oil pump to the pinion shaft. So if you have any kind of run out on your pinion shaft, it's going to give you the best centering of your pinion shaft, oil pump, and cam chest. So then they tell you what they do is they tell you to go 10 inch-pounds, do a cross pattern, 10 inch-pounds, spin the engine over again, and then torque it to 90 to 120 inch-pounds. I went to 40 inch-pounds after the first torque, so I went 10, 40, and then 120. After you're done with that, then you're going to go to your oil pump. And what you do is you go 10 inch-pounds, spin the engine over a few times. I went to 40 inch-pounds in a cross pattern, and then spun the engine over a few times, and then I did 120 inch-pounds. That just centers everything. Okay. When you put these screws in for your cam chest and your oil pump, you're going to use, I'll put it right here, ARP fastener assembly lubricant. It tells you not to use blue Loctite on these screws. You could use blue Loctite on your hydraulic tensioners, but not on your cam chest and your oil pump. So that's pretty much it. This is the assembly lube they give you. What is that? It looks like Torco. That's really thick stuff. It holds the O-rings in place really good when you go to assemble everything, so you don't have a chance of them falling out of place. And that's pretty much it. Pretty soon we're going to be putting on the sprockets and the chain and the outer tensioner. Tensioners are 100 to 120 inch-pounds for the tensioner screws, and you use blue Loctite on those. And that's it. All right, we're doing our cam sprocket and our pinion shaft sprocket. We're lining them now. So basically they give you different spacers with the kit. They give you 5. We got it down to like 2 that were really close within spec. You don't want to be more than a 10,000th of an inch spacer behind your straight edge when you do this. So we got it down to a 140 thousandths, what we determined would be the best one. This pinion shaft gear was pain in the ass. It had a little burr in there. We had to file it down a little bit to get the burr out so we could get this on. It's still snug. It still went on pretty snug, and we just used a piece of plastic behind here and a little brake adjustment tool, and just went behind here and just brought it off nice and gentle. So that's what we had to do with this. That took us a little bit of time to get this gear to get on and off. It's still pretty tight now. Anyway, this is a cam gear. We got our spacer. Got 140 thousand spacer. You put this on. This one actually goes on pretty good. You can kind of wiggle it on there. Your bowl. This is how we measure it. Snug it down. I was using a dial of calipers, and I was just trying to see how far the measurement was. I'm checking that measurement, and then that's telling me from the cam chest to the face of the sprocket what it is for the depth. And then I would do the same thing on my pinion shaft just to see what I was getting for a depth measurement on this in this sprocket, because basically it's essentially the same thing as checking with a straight edge across, and I'm going to do that too, but this kind of gets you pretty damn close measuring that way, and then keeping this pretty nice and level, and then measuring this way too. And then you take the measurement, you want it to be less than 10,000ths of an inch difference, and right now I'm at that. So I'm only about 4,000ths difference between both. But the way the manual tells you to do it is you take a straight edge, you put it on your sprocket, and then you hold it flush, nice and flat here on both. And then you want to take where's my feeler gauge? Take a feeler gauge, and say I'm going to hold it right in here, nice and flat. You shouldn't be able to get a 10,000ths feeler gauge between the sprocket and this flat edge, straight edge. So that's fine right there. I mean, I have a little, I can feel it There's a little bit there. It's close, but it won't go through. Put your straight edge across. You could check it here if you want, in case you think you're too far out. You'll see light through it too. You can use a drop light, put a drop light behind it, and see if you have light coming through, just to do it quickly before even measuring it with a feeler gauge. But hold it flush. Try to work off your pinion shaft. See what you get here for a gap. If you're under 10 thousandths, you're good to go. That's pretty much it. And what we got is your sprocket. You got your timing marks here, and you got your timing mark there. This is equally set, the sprocket in the middle. So, but this has numbers on the outside, so I'm going by using the numbers on the outside and then set this in place. So what we got to do is we got to get this on here, kind of eyeball it, get it close. You got a little flat in your splines, same thing on here, so you'll line up. This goes on. This is a little snug too, but I mean it's definitely workable to get it on and off, no problem. And then you want to set that there. That's about where we're going to fall with this. And our crank. If I have to, I'll spin the back wheel a little bit to get it lined up. So that's lined up there. Bring it back a little bit more. Go. It's lined up there. Okay, we got our pinion sprocket on, our camshaft sprocket on. We got the timing marks aligned right here. We got our camshaft bolt, our crankshaft bolt in. They tell you torque them to 15 foot-pounds, then go backwards 1 revolution on each bolt, and then torque them to 34 foot-pounds on the camshaft, 24 foot-pounds on the pinion shaft. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our tensioner in. We're going to Loctite these screws with blue Loctite. We're going to torque it to 100 to 120 inch-pounds. So let's get that done. We'll clean our bolts off. Spray them with a little bit of brake clean because all this stuff comes with a little bit of oil on them. Probably just so things don't rust up and shit in shipping. You clean them off. Okay. Now we're going to take our tensioner. They're Loctite. Put a little bit of blue Loctite in each one. And then we're going to torque it to, it says 100 to 120, so we'll tighten this one about halfway. 120. 120. Check it again. 120. 120. That's it. So that's done. That's installed. Tensioner's done. Time marks are done. Cam and crank pinion shaft are all torqued. Don't forget, pull your pin on your tensioner. That'd be bad if you forget that. And then this is good for now. So then we're going to do our next. We'll be doing our lifters, the tappet blocks, and then push rods, tubes, and then we did order billet rocker arm supports. So we'll be putting a little bit better billet rocker arm supports in. I did figure out the cams that were in this by the numbers and the markings on the old cams, and they were stock cams that they put in this. So they did have the upgraded hydraulic cam chest in this bike, but they put stock cams. They don't look like they have that much mileage on them. I couldn't tell if they're original or if they were put in with the cam chest. So regardless, we're putting in 525 Reaper cams from Feuling. So he's gonna get a little bit of upgrade there, have a little bit better cams. We're gonna be putting in billet rocker arm supports. Those are made by Twin Power that we're getting. We're gonna check those out, see how they come, you know, and then we'll check the end shaft play on the rocker arms and all that. And I also did buy a kit for this. It's called rocker lockers. Okay, so we got the rocker arm out, the shaft is out, and the way that these work is you can see how much play there is in that hole, and you can see the notch in the shaft. Well, the bolt is supposed to lock the shaft to the housing, and what happens over time is these it's not going to go to that way. It goes, presses in this way. But what happens over time is this notch is going to do this back and forth, and it's going to do it right against the shaft. So you're going to get it back and forth ticking. So basically by putting this bushing in, and one side's smaller than the other, it won't go in that way. It goes in one way. You're going to get it into about 3/8 of an inch all the way in. You're going to put your bolt in, and then they give you a washer and a nut. I'm not going to install it on this because I'm putting the new billet rocker arm support plates in. You put that in, and then you're going to draw that bushing right in with the rocker arm obviously installed first. So it's very simple, easy to put in, easy to work, easy to install. So what happens is and I talked to John at Rockout, that's who makes these. There's other companies, I think Rocker Locker's one, Rockout's one. I think they're just a bushing. What it is these are billet aluminum, and the hole in this is a little bit bigger than the stock one. It's actually about a 5/1000th difference in diameter. So I talked to John and told him that these were going right through the hole. They're just going right in without being pressed. So they shouldn't do that. You should be able to, you should have to press it in at least 3/8 of an inch to give it a nice snug fit. But being that they're not doing that and they're going right through, he's sending me another kit he has for aftermarket rocker arm support plates. So I'll be getting those in the next couple days. I just wanted to explain quickly what these are for and what they do. And they quiet the whole top end of the engine up by installing them. So anyway, we'll be putting these in soon. We're moving on to the next video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to prime our lifters with oil. This is just some 1540 Harley Davidson Screaming Eagle oil. And we're going to put it in a little side hole, and then you're going to squeeze it. And then you're going to just keep filling it up until it comes out of the top. I did these already once, but you can see a little bubble there came through there. We got one little bubble there. It's pretty good. So after you have them filled with oil, these are brand new lifters, so we're not worrying about the orientation they came out to make sure we put them in the same way. If you reuse lifters, you want to put them in the same way. So these three are in already. If you look at them, you have flats. That's really the most important thing, is you have your flats facing forward and backwards. If you don't, you're not going to get your anti-roll pin in there anyway. And you have a hole on one side or the other. So there's the hole, and there's no hole on this side. So it doesn't matter if you put the hole outboard or inboard, because your oil galley in the back here covers half the whole lifter body, and you're going to fill this whole area here with oil anyway and pressurize it. and it's going to come up, and it's going to hit the hole with oil regardless. So, but if you want to keep it all uniform, do them all the same way. I did mine with all the holes facing outward. Just bring them here, put them in nice and easy. You don't want to drop them. You don't want to do any damage to your cams. You got your hole, put them down right there for where it stops. And then you take your anti-roll pin, rotational pin. You want to put this in here, and this is going to lock these lifters from rotating side to side. You definitely do not want to forget that, or you're going to have a catastrophic explosion in your engine. So that's basically it. Then you got your gaskets, and after you put your gaskets on, if you look at your gasket, you can see the gasket has these two tabs coming off of it, and those two tabs are going to sit right over that anti-rotational pin, and those gaskets are going to line right up anyway with your cover, so you want to make sure you just have them the right direction. So it's like that, and your gaskets will align with those two bosses, and those bosses are going to press and make sure that pin can't come up and pop out. Put a little blue Loctite on these, I recommend. And then I think it's 90 to 120 inch-pounds. Torque them down across from each other, nice and even, and then do the rear. Yeah. So basically, we got the push rod tubes and push rods in the front, and I kept them when I took them out. I kept the orientation in the correct way. I mean, I know we put new lifters in, but you know, this is still riding against the same rocker arm. So you want to keep them in the same direction. The exhaust is taller than the intake as well. I could pull these out because I know which way they go. And the darker one on this bike, the darker one is the exhaust. So it's hard to see it, but here, I'll pull these off. So you can see that the difference in height is right there, maybe a 1/8 inch or so on the exhaust and the intake. So then we just take them, put them back in the same way they came out. So we got the intake, we get the exhaust. So what you do with these push rod tubes is you got 3 O-rings. You got your bottom O-ring, you got one in the middle, and you have one on the top. Put a little oil on them, just so that it makes it easier to install. You know, you get this up into the head, get it lined up, press down your collar with the spring in it, take your locking plate and snap it into place, and that's it. It's simple. There's Dave, happy owner, brand new cam set.
Sounds good.